Stan Gibilisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV. Whiskey 1 Good Vibrations. In August of 1980, there was a massive Category 5 Caribbean hurricane called Allen. Some of you may remember that storm, particularly if you live in extreme southern Texas, in the Brownsville area. Hurricane Allen set several records at the time for length of, well, just several records. And you can read about Hurricane Allen in Wikipedia, of course. And you can also read about a meteorologist named Dr. Neil Frank. Just Wikipedia on him. Neil Frank. Neil Frank. Served as the director of the National Hurricane Center at that time. And I remember very well watching Hurricane Allen's progress. And at the time I lived in Cocoa Beach, Florida, in a really funky bachelor pad right on the beach. And I remember Hurricane Allen and feeling the relief that every Floridian feels when a big hurricane like that passes the state by. It struck very few land masses directly until it got near Texas. And then its eye stalled for a couple of hours off the coast of Texas. And Dr. Neil Frank at the National Hurricane Center used an amateur radio station to communicate in the aftermath of Hurricane Allen, as after it passed over the Brownsville area. Brownsville had lost all of its conventional communications infrastructure, but ham radio, of course, still worked, and somebody at the weather center there in Brownsville set up a ham radio station, battery powered, with nothing more than a wire antenna, to communicate information to and receive information from Dr. Neil Frank. I remembered Neil Frank also from my experience with Hurricane David in 1979, when it gave Miami a close shave. I lived in a southern suburb of Miami called Perrine at the time, and remember watching Dr. Neil Frank on television, a very animated fellow and very, very colorful guy. And later I learned that, if my memory serves, he had really always wanted to be a basketball coach, but somehow ended up serving for several years, over a decade, I think, as the director of the National Hurricane Center. But he used ham radio for vital communications during one of the worst hurricanes ever to strike the United States or pass through the Caribbean Sea. There have been others since. And global warming or climate change is often blamed for some of these hurricanes. Dr. Neil Frank, if you'll read about him in Wikipedia, is a signatory to a declaration, an evangelical declaration having to do with climate change. And it's interesting, that declaration states that, or the belief that the earth is a self-regulating mechanism, unlike my mouth, which seems to be out of control at times. A self-regulating mechanism that has the ability to correct any imbalances that might arise, including those caused by human activity. In other words, it's kind of goes against the grain of conventional thinking on global warming and climate change, which seems to place a lot of the blame on human activity. I'm not sure exactly what the agreement says, and I'm not going to put any claims on this video about what Neil Frank may think exactly about it. But I did allude in another video to a rather terrifying prospect involving that very notion. If the Earth is, in fact, a self-regulating mechanism capable of correcting imbalances, then if indeed human activity does cause a significant enough imbalance, the Earth may take measures to regulate its climate by perhaps eliminating the destructive factor. Well, now I'm getting into a lot of speculation, but what I really wanted to say here was that ham radio played a vital role in one of the worst hurricanes ever to cross through the Caribbean Sea, and one of the most venerable and famous directors of the National Hurricane Center made use of ham radio to communicate into a disaster area, because it was the only means by which any communication could be had out of that disaster area, Brownsville, Texas. When all else fails, ham radio still works. It has always been thus, and that's why we need to defend ham radio as a privilege that we enjoy, and hope that we never lose that privilege. Stan Gibilisco, W1GV, signing off, saying 73 and so long, which, had I been director of the Hurricane Center, would have communicated in CW, and perhaps at the end of it all would have signed off with a surreptitious did-da-da-da-da.